masters, and the masters will be St. Thomas Aquinas, etc. So masters of theology is what I'm talking about. Okay, so you probably started with the prayer, but I always like to prime the pump up and ask for help. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Lady, seat of wisdom, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Sorry, Father. Anyway. All right, so this first section, I'm going to be focusing on monks. Now, Middle Ages, which would span, usually that would include the era from the fall of Rome, which would be, I believe, 476, until the beginnings of the Renaissance, the 14th century. So it's obviously a huge topic, and I would need more than, 3 hours and 15 minutes to do it, or 4 hours and 15 minutes to do it. But I'm going to focus in on monks, but we could just as easily focus in on popes and bishops, or even Catholic queens, and how they, marrying barbarian princes and dukes and kings, brought about the conversion of the barbarians and helped to save society too. And so that's basically going to be some of the possible topics you could write for a short reflection paper or research paper, depending upon how you want to handle it, or I'll talk to Leslie about which way. But since I can only cover one aspect, that's where I'm going to go. And then you can, as you wish, go further. Okay, so let's talk then about what started the Middle Ages would be the barbarian invasions. Okay, so, hello, am I doing this wrong? Yeah, there. Works. Okay, so what we have here, if we look just quickly at what was happening. Now the barbarians were pressuring and putting pressure on the Roman Empire throughout its history. Okay, so, and we have like Hadrian's Wall and things like that to keep the barbarians out. Okay, so most of these peoples are coming from the East, or what we would call Eastern Europe, and then into the Orient. So as we look here, you can see the different ways of people. So the Angles, Jutes, and Saxons are coming down from Denmark, Sweden, etc. The Vandals are coming from what would be Germanic, well, the Germanic tribes, right? And they are going to travel, as you can see, the Vandals going from like the Germanic areas and then crossing Europe, kind of avoiding the Visigoths, going down and conquering Africa, and then from Africa starting to attack Italy and things like that. And then we also have the Goths coming in from the area around what would now be Russia, Uzbekistan. I forget all the stands up there, but as you can see, around the Cimmerian Sea. So they're coming down. Now it's interesting, depending upon the different Germanic tribes, right? What do you think of when you think of Gothic? Now, I know my students would think of something dark and black, but how about Gothic architecture, right? Whereas Vandals, what do you think of as Vandals? Yeah, people who wantonly destroy things. Okay, so if you would, the Vandals kept their barbarian reputation. Okay, so as you can see, we have the Goths, the Huns coming in from like Tibet, and then, or that direction, and then you have the different various kinds of Goths and Vandals. Okay, now what we'll see, so we'll continue. So who are these? Let's look at a few of these invasions instead of just arrows. So first, we have the sack of Rome in 410 by Alaric and the Visigoths. Okay, now something to understand is Alaric wasn't just any old barbarian who just happened to be lucky. Towards the end of the Roman Empire, many of the Romans that normally and traditionally would have joined the army and fought for the empire really didn't want to do that. They wanted to take care of their own things. So they were like having slaves. It's like, if you go fight in my place, I'll give you freedom. Or they were hiring people to fight for them. And so the way the Romans kind of handled that is they would like go to the barbarian tribes and say, we will hire you and pay you, and we'll even train you to be our auxiliary troops, and then you protect borders against the other barbarian tribes. And so Alaric is one of these. Okay, he is actually a Roman-trained auxiliary troop officer who is going to lead his men. Why are they leading them down to Rome for a sack? Is because the Roman government is going bankrupt and they have failed to be paid. And so Alaric and his men are coming down to get their back wages. And when the emperor says, sorry, I'm kind of broke, I don't have anything, Alaric is going, that's okay, we'll take care of it. And they go through the city and pillage and take what they take their back pay. Well, at that point, the Roman emperor says, how about I'll give you some land? Yeah, and you and your men can go farm somewhere. And so Alaric does take that and he leaves Rome. Okay, now, so if you would, the Visigoths start to, northern Italy, Switzerland area, start to settle down there. Okay, now, the Vandals are, as I said, circumventing the Goths. They kind of pass through Spain, cross over into northern Africa. And this is the time period, by the way, that Augustine is dealing with, at the end of his life, is dealing with the refugees that are fleeing from the Vandals' encroachment. And in fact, he won't die a martyr, but he will die even as Hippo is being laid siege to by the Vandals in 430. Okay? Now, very soon after that, we have the fall of Carthage. And once Genseric and the Vandals have Carthage, they're going to start their raiding parties into Italy across the Mediterranean. Now, the Huns are also coming from the east.
Put the password in for me before I get
that. So we have, at this point, okay, we have Leo the Great, that is Leo the Pope. Okay, and what's happening is the Roman government is just unable to defend the people, and so if you would, the trade routes, the army, everything is pretty much falling into disarray. And because nobody is helping the common people, that is why Leo is going to step up and start protecting the people. Nobody else is doing it. I mean, he's appealing to the emperor in the east. Nobody is taking care of it. And so Leo himself, with only a couple of deacons, will go out to meet Attila or Attila, depending upon your pronunciation. And with that, he will negotiate Attila turning away and, raiding other places. Okay. So, by the way, Leo is also the one, this is also the Council of Chalcedon taking place in the Eastern Church. Okay, so, and he's setting off the tome of Leo to the Council of Chalcedon, defining the hypostatic union, that Jesus is one person with two divine natures. Excuse me, that is incorrect. Oh my, heresy. Okay, one divine person with a human and a divine nature. Okay, so the hypostatic union, namely the two natures united in the person of Christ. Okay, now what happens is the second sack of Rome will take place in 455. Genseric will land and sack Rome. And then we'll see, under the pressure of repeated barbarian pressure because of economic collapse, we see that Rome will fall in 476, and the last Roman emperor is Romulus Augustulus, who is dethroned by the Ostrogoth king Odoacer. And then Odoacer will call himself Rex, as in the Latin term for king of Rome. And he himself will rule until another Ostrogoth chieftain, Theodoric, will then, he's fighting with Odoacer. Odoacer, by the way, evidently had a bone disease of some sort. And Theodoric had a truce where they were going to meet. His henchmen were supposed to kill him before they actually got to the truce. And when he showed up, it's kind of like, why didn't you guys kill him? And so he takes his own sword and goes to strike him on the neck and literally cleaves him in 2 pieces, from neck to groin. And his comment was, of course, my God, did this man have any bones? But evidently a bone disease so severe, and that might be why his henchmen didn't have the heart to kill him, is because he was obviously in such delicate health already. Well, anyhow, Theodoric will take up a policy that's a little bit more moderate, and he's willing to take in Latins and things like that. And so we'll see this is the time of Boethius and Cassiodorus, and some of the last of the great classical writers will be writing at this time, okay? But I can't focus here, we don't have too much time. So, anyway, what we'll see is the story is being repeated throughout Europe, and we'll see one of the major conversions. By the way, there is Arianism, I don't know if you had that in any of your other classes, but Arianism that would deny that Jesus is God. There is an Arian missionary, very zealous, who goes and preaches to a lot of barbarian tribes. And so many of these barbarian tribes accept Arian Christianity. Okay, problem. All right. Well, Clovis, who is one of the barbarian chieftains of the Franks, is going to settle it in, of course, France. And some of the barbarian princesses and some of the barbarians individually are being converted to Catholicism. Clovis is a pagan, actually. And so there's an arrangement for him to marry the Catholic barbarian princess Clotilde, and with the help of Saint Remigius, who is the bishop in this area, Clovis, at first, when they lose their first child and then their second child dies very soon after birth, he kind of is saying, yeah, Catholic, this is really a potent religion, it saved 2 of our children. He's not really sold on Catholicism, but at a certain point, he's facing another barbarian chieftain, and he's very outnumbered, and so he does kind of what Constantine does earlier, right, at the Milvian Bridge, and that is, he says, if the God of my wife will arrange for me to win, then I and my knights will become Catholic. And against all odds, he wins, and so he fulfills his vow. And so he and his 3,000 warriors on Christmas Day, 596, are baptized. Oh, and by the way, Saint Remigius, during the, how a mitre, or excuse me, the crosier of the bishop has a point as well as the hook on the side. Well, Remigius didn't realize it, but he had placed the point of his crosier right into Clovis's foot. And Clovis didn't say a word because he thought it was part of the baptismal ceremony. And so when Remigius sees the blood coming out of his foot, it's like, oh, sorry. And he's like, oh, you mean that wasn't part of the rite? Okay. No, not normally. You don't push on the foot for baptism. But, okay, little side story. Now, when the dust settles then, what are these kingdoms, the barbarian kingdoms that we're going to see here? So this is, roughly we see the Visigoths have Spain, we have the Sueves up in what was now Portugal, we've got the Burgundians, we've got the kingdom of the Ostrogoths, which would be Italy, some part of Switzerland, Albania, etc. You still have the Byzantine Empire, somewhat reduced, and then you have the kingdom of the Vandals, etc. Okay, so the kingdom of the Franks, and to this day, France is known as the eldest daughter of the church because of Clovis and his men being the largest mass conversion to take place. Okay. So that kind of the context. So now let's look at the monks and how they helped make this happen. Okay, so what we're going to see is the monks have the same basic goal, but they're going to have variations of how they accomplish this goal. So what is the main goal of a monk? And that is going to be to really seriously live their Christian commitment and to, if you would, create a space for other people to do so too. This will include perpetual prayer, or praise of God, which will later take shape as the Liturgy of the Hours, is what we call it today. Okay? Now, if you go way back to the time of like St. Anthony of Egypt and Paul of Thebes, the original monks were hermits, right? They were living an eremitical life because they couldn't be martyred anymore. How could you seriously follow Christ? Well, you seriously follow Christ and can't die for him, then you leave the world and you live exclusively for him. Okay, so eventually that's going to develop into people living in community, okay, or the Cenobitic type of life. So we see Anthony tries to go farther and further out into the desert, and people keep following him, asking for spiritual direction, and finally he just lets them live next to him, and he starts being called Abba, or Father, right? So the abbot of the first community, okay? We'll also see along the lines of the Nile River, Pachomius and his sister found a men's and women's order, etc. And we're going to see that type of monasticism flourish in the East, okay? So, well, I'm already starting to talk about the next slide, so let me get there. Okay, so the strains of monasticism. The Eastern monastic tradition, as I was just briefly describing it, the idea of living in community. This is going to start to come into Europe through the trade routes, monks traveling with traders. And so they'll actually arrive in Ireland, and we'll see the Irish actually were more familiar with Greek than Latin because of this Eastern monks coming in this way. We also are going to see a man named Cassian, who starts out formed in the East, and he is going to bring his monasticism to the West at, I believe it's Marseille in France. Okay? And what he's going to do is he's going to kind of moderate it. What do we see in the Eastern monasticism is this asceticism. It's like barely eating, barely sleeping, praying all the Psalms every day, penitence. Now they do work, they make a living by the work of their hands, and Anthony started that. But the emphasis is very penitential, very long prayers, and what Cassian will do is he'll kind of balance that out a little bit. So he's going to take the Greek monasticism and make it more moderate, as in more livable for people to actually do it for long term. Now, he still held up the idea is the perfect monk would be a hermit, but he would say hermits can only be hermits after they've lived in a community and really formed their spirituality firmly before they go off to be a hermit. Okay, so, and by the way, Benedict will be influenced by Cassian. Okay, and then of course there's Benedictine monastic tradition, where we have the saying of Benedict is ora et labora. And he will eventually write his rule. Like Cassian, it will be more moderate and more humane. Not that there won't be any penances, but it's saying, what's the use of a penance if it doesn't help you grow in love of God? So keep your eye on the goal, is love of God. And again, the idea of perpetual praise. Whereas the Eastern monks might say 150 psalms in a day, Benedict is going to spread it out over a week, right? 150 psalms in a week rather than every day. And I tried that once, and if you try praying all the psalms, all 150 psalms in a day, you about have enough time to eat and excuse yourself. That's about it. Okay, so what is Benedict doing then is carving out time for the monks to actually do manual labor and be self-sufficient, as in they raise their own crops, etc. Okay, now part of the work that Benedict, the Opus Dei, would be the Divine Liturgy itself. Okay, now we also have Celtic monasticism that we're going to see with St. Patrick and then the monasteries that are formed under his guidance. And they are going to be more influenced by the asceticism of the East. Okay, so this would be like saying all 150 songs while you are submerged in ice cold water, sleeping on wet blankets or on cold flagstones. It's kind of very austere. Like, it's amazing that these monks persevered for any length of time in doing these very rigorous penances. Okay, so let's look at where they were established. I hope you can, I kind of tried to take a map and adapt it to what I wanted it for. So let's look at it. You can kind of see up in Ireland and Scotland and the west side of England, we're going to see the Celtic monks are on that side. And then as they come out of Ireland and start to go back to the mainland, we'll see, as you can see, a couple pockets in Burgundy or up in northern France, and then around Poitiers in France, just a little bit south of Tours, and then Lyon. Okay, now Benedict is at first, really at the time of Benedict's death, I'll probably repeat this, but at the time of Benedict's death, there was only 3 monasteries that followed the Benedictine rule. Now, eventually, the Benedictine type of monasticism would prevail throughout the West. All these different monasteries took on that more moderate version of monasticism as more livable, right? And more sustainable. And then probably the Eastern monks are probably the hardest to see, but hopefully they come out. As you can see, Asia Minor through the Holy Land down into Egypt, and then around Carthage and Hippo. Okay. With some pockets, as you can see, in northern Italy and France, southern France. Okay, so now how do they play a role in the conversion of the barbarians? First of all, and this would be true of any of the monastic orders, is they would have guest houses to take care of the poor. And even the Celtic monks, with all of their severe penances, will see, like Columban saying, I don't want my monks to be idiots. So even or illiterate. So even the Celtic monks collected libraries and preserved and copied manuscripts and taught. Okay, so this is very important to all of them. And then some of the types of monasteries would be, especially with the wandering monks of the Irish, they would found monasteries in different places to keep hold of the conversion of the people. In other words, to have an outpost where their new converts could go and solidify their faith. Okay, so as we see there. Okay. Now, so we're going to see that they're very important for the preservation of culture because they're housing refugees. At first, they're copying the Bible and like scripture commentaries and things like that. But if you're going to teach Latin to your pupils, you need to have other things too. And so we'll start to see monks going from just holy things being copied to more secular things like the classical Latin of Cicero or Cicero, however you want to pronounce it, and Livy and the others. Okay. And then, of course, the monastic schools are preserving education. Now, that doesn't mean that they were high education, but at least they were keeping alive reading and writing and some basic skills. So obviously some monasteries better than others in preserving that. Okay, so let's look at Celtic or Celtic monasticism. It's going to start with St. Patrick, and you might know his story pretty well. Originally he's the son of a deacon in Latin Britain. Okay, so, and his dad gets ordained a deacon precisely to escape the high taxation of the late Roman Empire. Okay, he, somewhere in his late teens, is kidnapped and taken to Ireland as a slave, and there he will, become serious about his faith. Eventually, he will escape. He'll have a vision that tells him how to escape, and he does it, and he gets back. And when he gets back, he feels the call to go back and evangelize the very people that he was enslaved by. And so he'll go to a monastery where he's trained and lives as a monk for a while. He'll get ordained a bishop, and then he'll head over and he comes to Armagh. Now, what's unique about Irish Christianity is in all of the rest of Europe, Christians basically are Latin speakers, right? In other words, Christianity came to them through the Roman Empire and that. But we're going to see in Ireland is Patrick is directly converting these people from paganism to Christianity without the influence of Latin culture. And so it kind of takes on its own character. And in fact, we'll see the organization of the church in Ireland is Patrick will found a monastery, as a missionary outpost, and then he'll ordain a bishop to take care of it. And so in Ireland, monasteries are associated with the bishops. So there's not really a secular clergy. It's the bishop with the monks around him taking care of the people of the area. Okay. So whereas you find in the Eastern monasticism, most of the monks are laymen. Maybe one or two are priests. Okay. So it's a little different. Uh-oh, I just went out. Do I automatically shut it off?
Yeah, it's got a filter problem and it overheats, but it'll
so
come on in about a minute.
Okay. All right. Well, what will happen is in these monasteries, now if you read the Confessions of Patrick and look at those, you'll see that he himself did some pretty horrendous penances, like I was just saying. He would pray all 150 psalms twice a day. And it tells you how much he actually slept. It's not much. And in fact, when he would start by like saying 50%, 50 of the psalms, he would like say with his arms extended. And then, with 50 more, he would wade into the water to keep awake. Okay, so, and this was known as the Noiti Tricoicad, if I'm pronouncing my Gaelic correctly. But it just means the 350s is he would say 50 of the psalms in one penitential position, 50 psalms in the next penitential, just to stay awake for the second version, or the second going through. He also had what you call St. Patrick's Purgatory, which is a mountain where he did penance, which would include like climbing the mountain of gravel on his knees and things like that. So these are just some of the things that he's doing. Now, if you consider that he is doing this penance for the conversion of his people, right? And also something unique to Irish Christianity is you don't have any of the violent persecutions and martyrdoms taking place here. It's Christianity basically replaces the Druidism that's there. And he, through his miracles, through his preaching, through his penance, he basically convinces the people of the truth of Christianity. Are we back yet? Shall we try? Okay. Okay, well, eventually we'll see it come back on because I have another map to show you. But, well, let's talk about after about a generation, and hey, good, it's coming. After about a generation or so, we're going to see the Celtic Christianity extremely strong, very monastic in its practice. Now, of course, they're going to be lay people, otherwise the Irish people would have died out. But many of the Irish population were monks. Okay. Now, as this is developing, of course, the barbarians are coming through and just destroying Latin culture and Christianity, and so paganism is now covering Europe again, what sometimes is called the Dark Ages. Okay? And so we're going to see missionary monks from Ireland now going out and re-Christianizing Europe at this point. Okay? Now, one other thing that's really important to Celtic Christianity is in the Roman Empire, and I would say from the time of the apostles to about this time period, penance, the sacrament of penance or reconciliation was like a one-time deal that you did publicly, and then you did a prolonged penance. Like you could be years doing it. You'd be enrolled in the order of penitence, and you would be like maybe a penitent for 3 to 5 years, fasting and all that. What the Irish monks have started is the custom of confessing to each other, this idea of spiritual fathers. So, like even weekly confession, ghostly fathers is what they would call it, instead of spiritual directors. But this is what the Irish monks are also going to be bringing back into Europe, is this idea of frequent confession and private confession, not public confession. And eventually the popes will go in favor of that and actually ban public confession and go to private confession and the seal of confession, etc. Okay, so this is going to happen thank the Irish, they gave us that. Okay. Now, the one I'm going to follow the most will be Columban. Now, a lot of these, oh, by the way, if we look at these, what happened is as the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes started to invade Ireland and England, of course, the monasteries were known for, they don't fight, so there's nothing defending them, and they're usually the wealthier areas. So monasteries were favorite targets for barbarian invaders. So one of the solutions is those monks that survived would go out and live on a little island and they were already living pretty austerely, so I guess that didn't change. But they went out to these islands. So here are some examples of remnants of places where the Irish monks went when they were escaping the raiders. Okay, so let's look at the path of some of these Celtic missionaries. This would be 6th to the 8th century. So I hope you can read that, but Columban is the one at the purple that, as you can see, he's bouncing around all over the place. Now, his idea was peregrination for Christ, the pilgrimage for Christ. I'm going to go wherever God takes me. So a lot of these Irish monks would just get in a boat without any type of plan or directions, just wherever the current took them, so that they would be totally in God's hands. And so we see Columban leaving from Bangor and going down, landing, as you can see, just under Burgundy. And then he just basically randomly started walking. And when there was people to preach to, he preached. He would set up a monastery and then wander again. As you can see, he kind of bounces all over the place. He'll even get down to Bobbio, Italy, which will be where he dies. Okay, but one of them, we see some of his, Luxil would be one of his major foundations. Okay, so these would be some examples. Okay, now I also put St. Patrick up there so you can see, starting at founding his center at Armagh, he'll then go throughout Ireland preaching the gospel and setting up monasteries. We also have other monasteries like Columba and I forget some of the other guys' names, but they'll also, they're the lighter purple, and they might disappear. I guess it looks better up there than on my screen. But they'll re-Christianize Scotland and England. Okay, but unfortunately, the Celts will be so resentful of the ferocity and the cruelty of the Anglo-Saxons that when Gregory the Great asks them to go preach the gospel again to England, where on the east side of England, Christianity goes extinct because of so many raids and killings, that when the Celts are asked to preach to them, a lot of them are saying, no, we're not going to. And so he sends actually a Roman, Augustine of Canterbury, will be sent over to preach the gospel. More on him a little bit later. Okay, and then you'll also see the brighter orange is going to be Boniface, the great missionary to the Germans or the Frisians. Okay, he's actually a British monk. Okay, so and he's going to be preaching the gospel after Augustine goes over. He'll about a generation later come back and re-Christianize Europe. So we kind of see them hopping back and forth over the channel. Okay. Now, with that, we'll come back and look at some of these individuals, but for right now, let's look at Benedict. Okay, so Benedict of Nursia, he is born in 480, or around that time period. And if you remember, that's right about when Theodoric is becoming the emperor, or the Rex, of Rome. Okay, so the kingdom of the Goths, rather than the Roman Empire. Now, his family is one of the patrician families, and his family has the tradition of service in Roman government. And so he is sent to Rome to finish his education. Well, there we have the paganism and the decadence of the city, and he decides that the wisdom that the world has to give him is really not worth achieving. And so he will leave with his nurse and go out to a small town outside of Rome. And there he will start to live a life of penitence. Now, the legend is that the nurse broke a sieve, and so she brings it to her master saying, "I'm sorry, I just broke this sieve, we have nothing to pay for it." And he says, "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of it." And he prays over it, and the sieve miraculously comes together. And the nurse is so excited, she's telling everybody, and pretty soon everybody's beating the door down for miracles, right? So Benedict goes a little further out into, so just some really basic dates up there. So Benedict will go out to Enfide, and there he will find a little cave near a ruined villa. And he also finds a monk who will basically give him spiritual direction. He lives up in a little cave, so he climbs up the crag of a mountain, lives there's a little spring, and there he will live for about 3 years. Okay? Now, unbeknownst to him, the monk Romanus dies during Lent, and he thinks, oh, my master is just giving me a more severe fast for Lent, so he's happily starving to death in the cave. Until Jesus, according to, by the way, this is from St. Gregory the Great's second dialogue, if you're interested in reading it. You can find it online if you wish. So St. Gregory the Great, second dialogue, you can come up with it. But according to Gregory, the local parish priest has a vision of Christ on Easter morning as he's eating his breakfast and said, "There's a holy monk starving to death in the cave, go get him. Or go bring him breakfast." And so he comes, and Benedict just, even though he's starving to death, hasn't eaten for maybe 30 days, he very calmly blesses the Lord and these gifts and eats as if he just had a meal, 6 hours ago. And so the parish priest goes around and tells all the people how holy he is, and pretty soon people are beating down his door again. Well, then there is, the monks came and asked, there's a monastery close by, they ask him to be their abbot, and they're a mixed group, right? Some of them really want to live monastic life, others are more, relaxed, and really they're monks in name only. So he says, realize that if I'm going to be your father, I'm going to make you follow your rule. And they say, oh yes, we want you. Well, pretty soon, the monks are fighting amongst themselves, and Benedict, they attempt to poison him. They pour poison in his wine, and again, he always blesses his food, and when he blesses the cup, it shatters. And he turns to his monks and said, well, I hope you can find a father that you can follow. You didn't have to go to the 6th grade. I'll leave. And so he goes back to his cave, and by the way, this cave is very close to Subiaco. And so what happens is very soon, in fact, this middle picture is preserved very, very close to the Subiaco monastery. Okay, and is just the one edge. The other side is a little altar and place where you can pray. Well, he goes to Subiaco, and there the local people start to send their sons to him for education. So we have, if you would, the beginning of Benedictine Oblates, sending the children to learn under the master. And some of these students will include Maris and Placidus, and it will be Placidus's family that will donate Monte Cassino to Benedict later. Okay, so we have Subiaco. You can see how it's literally perched in the mountains. We also see, by the way, the little story, you can see Maris. Benedict says, "Quick, one of the novices is drowning in the lake, go get him." And so Maris goes out and runs across the water, pulls the novice out of the water, runs back up to the shore, puts the novice down and says, "I just walked on water." So he goes to Benedict and says, "Father Benedict, I just walked on water." He said, "Isn't it wonderful what obedience will do?" Okay, so, all right, so little story. Well, eventually, jealousy of other monks in the area that are following different rules, pressure him out, and probably also the monastery is, becoming crowded, limited space in this very limited area. And so, with the donation of Placidus's parents, he goes to Monte Cassino, which is about halfway between Rome and, I can't remember the other city, but let's say it's about 20 miles south of Rome, okay? And there he climbs the mountain, and there he finds a grove still sacred to Apollo. And something that's also important about the conversion of Europe is that Christianity, up to the time of monasticism, was basically a phenomenon of the city. That's where the bishop was and things like that. And so with this movement of monasteries into the country, we're going to see the conversion of the country people. And in fact, the Latin word for pagan is actually the word for a country bumpkin or a hick. In other words, who were the last people to be converted were the country people. Okay, so he finds a grove sacred to Apollo. He, of course, shatters the idol, cuts down the grove, and builds the first church that will be on Monte Cassino. And there, by the way, he started writing his rule at Subiaco under the request of the Pope. So now he builds Monte Cassino. Now, the church that you see there, the monastery that you see up here, was rebuilt after the American forces bombed it. Okay, so it's not the original monastery, but it is rebuilt. You can see on the one, you can see the terraces of vineyards and things like that. Now, one thing that wherever the monks went, they would usually find some remote spot that was abandoned and destroyed. And so what would occur is land that had become useless because of barbarian invasions and abandonment is being reclaimed. And the local people who had nobody helping them because the government had long since abandoned them, what they found is they could go to the monks and get help. The monks were innovating new farming techniques. And so a lot of the local people would donate their lands to be under the monks' care. And so you'd see the revitalization of the local people. So it was very much advantageous to everybody when the monks moved in. Okay, it was like, well. Okay, now we also see the development of women's orders. And so Scholastica, just like Pachomius' sister starts a women's order, we're going to see Scholastica, who Gregory names as his twin, will found a monastery halfway down the mountain, and so this is Scholastica's monastery. And so, by the way, the women's orders are more about prayer and penitence and praying for conversions, whereas the monks are, from the get-go, missionaries, teachers, and helping with that. Okay, so just a quick flash of the local monastery, and I don't know if you can see it in great detail, but here, let me magnify this part of it. Okay, what we're going to see here is, this would be like the main entrance, and you'll notice one of the structures right there is the guest house, the school, and the abbot's house, and then if you keep going, the scriptorium, and things like that. So, and the Benedictine monk would, as it said, ora et labora. So whether you were out taking care of cows, whether you were assigned to the scriptoria, whether you were assigned to be a teacher, all the monks lived in common. They did what they were assigned to do, and they became this great dynamism of saving culture and spreading culture. Okay. So, and then of course, what is their main function? As you can see, what is the main structure? The church, right? It was founded to honor God and to give Him praise. Okay, and again, to build a space where not just the monks, but others could follow Christ and live according to Him. Okay, now, as I said, at the time that Benedict died, only 3 monasteries were following this. Okay, so Subiaco, Monte Cassino, and then Terracina are the only 3 Benedictine monasteries at the time. Now, just a generation later, in 589, the Lombards, a new barbarian group, are going to come in, and the Longbeards, if you would, they're going to come in and take over and destroy. And again, monasteries are a key target precisely because they're wealthy, they've accumulated things, and unfortunately, the Lombards. One of the things they did is destroy the books. They burnt the books of the libraries that these monks were very carefully collecting. And I will say that any ancient writing that has survived to today survived because the monks were copying them constantly. Now, remember at this point there might be 3 Benedictine monasteries, but there are hundreds of other monasteries throughout Europe, and they're all copying it. And if one of them lived through it, then those manuscripts survived. Okay. Now, in the case of some of the Benedictine monks from Monte Cassino, escape from the Lombard attack, and they go to Rome. And when they go to Rome, the Pope gives them, helps them build a monastery right next to the Lateran Palace, which is the Papal Palace. Okay, and so the Benedictine rule starts to become well known. So, oh, happy fault. Okay, they get kicked out, but that means that the rule becomes better known. And then a patrician named Gregory, who is a Roman official of this time period, he is impressed with the Benedictines, and so he uses his own very substantial family patrimony to build another church, build another monastery, which he then leaves his very profitable secular job and becomes a monk in this monastery. Okay. Now, he also, it's at this time, you know, the famous thing of he sees his first Anglo-Saxon slave in the slave markets of Rome, and he's saying, wow, you know, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, when most everybody is dark-haired and dark-eyed. It's like, wow, where do these people come from? And he said, these are Angles from England. He says, not Angles, they're angels. Okay, so at that point, that's when he makes the determination that he's going to send missionaries. Such an angelic people should know Jesus. And so he is going to, from there, he plans at first to be the missionary, and then he gets elected Pope. Oh, by the way, when he is a Benedictine, the reigning Pope sends him to be a legate to the Emperor in the East at Constantinople. And this is a time period of not only the barbarians raiding, you've got the Black Death is starting to come in its first wave, and you also have all kinds of earthquakes and disasters occurring. So it's like, you can see where a lot of people probably thought it was the end of the world. But Gregory learned a lot from being in the Byzantine court, including how to fight. The Patriarch of Constantinople was kind of trying to take over and show himself to be at least equal to the Pope, if not superior to the Pope. And so Gregory is going to take a lot of what he learns at the Byzantine court when he comes back to be defending the independence of the church. Okay, so when he gets elected Pope in 590, he will eventually send one of his fellow monks, and that will be Augustine, which he later will become Augustine of Canterbury to keep him straight from Augustine of Hippo. He and 40 monks are set on mission to the Angles and Saxons, and he will land at Canterbury in England and start preaching the gospel, and so we'll see Christianity coming back to the western coast of England. So we have, if you would, the Celts are on the west side of the British Isles, and then these Benedictine spirituality is going to be on the west side. Okay. And then gradually what happens, because of the moderation of the Benedictine rule, more and more, even though they were founded by different Celtic ones. By the way, Columban is actually later than a Benedict, okay? But eventually his own monasteries will start adopting the Benedictine rule later. Okay, well, let's now talk about St. Boniface. He is a British monk from around Canterbury, so he's going to be a Benedictine, and in fact he is a contemporary of Saint Venerable Bede. Okay, so and Venerable Bede is one of the few monks that still knows a little Greek, and so he's translating the Gospels into English or Anglo-Saxon at that time and things like that. So we're seeing his learning, and also Boniface had a very good friend, a kinswoman, who was a nun in one of these British Isles, and so a lot of the history we know of this is the correspondence between he and his kinswoman, and she would pray and support his missionary efforts. Okay, well, originally he was born Winfrid, and he himself was a Benedictine oblate at Exeter Abbey. Eventually, a very promising student becomes a teacher in one of the Benedictine schools at Nutshilling, and then at 30 years old, he feels the call to start the peregrination for Christ. Okay, so if you would, the Celtic custom of wandering monks. Okay, by the way, I forgot to say this, Benedict adds something different than the Irish monks, and that is stability. Okay, all the monks had the vow of obedience, and they basically obeyed the monk, and then of course that led to poverty and chastity as well. But it's Benedict that will add this idea of stability, is that a monk will stay in the monastery where he entered instead of moving around. Okay, so that stability is going to add to the cultural building aspect of Benedictinism. Okay, so Winfrid will go out, and he'll start to preach to the Frisian tribes in like what we would call the Netherlands and Germany nowadays. But his initial attempt in 716 is a dismal failure. And so, and by the way, Winfrid was given to depressions and pessimism and things like that. So he's discouraged. He's like, is this really God's will? I don't know. So he goes to Rome, and he lives in Rome for a while. And there, Gregory II will be so impressed with his holiness that he convinces him to go back and be a missionary, and he ordains him a bishop. And he says to him, you shall not be called Winfrid anymore, but Boniface, meaning he who performs good works, because you're going to do great works for God. And so Winfrid, very attached to the papacy, and in fact his first church and monastery that he will build will be dedicated to St. Peter. And so all of his foundations will be very closely tied to the papacy. Okay. Now another thing is, this is also the time period of, Charles the Great. Charles Martel is stopping the Muslim hordes from coming up through Spain and taking over France, and his son Pepin the Short. So Charles Martel, Pepin the Short, and Carloman and Charlemagne, all these Frankish kings or mayors of the palace that do become kings, they are supporting Boniface. And in fact, Boniface says, if the Franks weren't supporting me, I could not possibly carry on this mission to the Frisians. Okay, so to kind of bring in what are some other historical elements at this time. Again, I'm just focusing on one. Okay, so Gregory ordains him, sends him back out, and Gregory III, his first act when he becomes the next pope, is to send the Pallium and name Boniface the archbishop of the area, and giving him power to appoint bishops and things like that. Okay, so Gregory will continue to establish monasteries. His most important one will be at Fulda in Germany. And even in his old age, like he's in his late 70s, he's going out to the missionaries. And in fact, that is when he gets martyred, is he's got some newly converted people that he goes out to confirm after he's baptized them. And it's there that he and the monks that go with him are martyred. And it is said that he took the liturgical book, just, instinct, covers his head with the liturgical book. And I guess they still have that as a relic, as the stab marks in that book. But he does die June 5th, 754. However, even though these barbarians kill him at this point, what we're going to see is his monasteries help to keep the faith in that area, and his own martyrdom will lead eventually to the permanent conversion of these Germanic areas. Okay, now let's look at another monk of the time period, and that is Alcuin, another British monk. Okay, and this would be at the time of Charlemagne. Now, if you notice, Boniface had anointed Pepin the Short, Charlemagne's father, king of the Franks. Now we're going to see his son Charlemagne working with other monks to bring about the Carolingian Renaissance of this time period. So Alcuin is an English Benedictine from Lindisfarne. In some of his travels in Italy, Charlemagne meets him, is very impressed with him, and lures him into being his minister of education in his newly formed government. Okay, and so what he does is he gives Alcuin the authority to establish schools, so establish dioceses, schools, and both laymen and monks are invited. And so we see under Charlemagne a rise in literacy, a rise in culture. In fact, Charlemagne will send monks back to the east to learn architecture, art. We're going to see devotion to Mary just take off. Now, devotion to Mary is already present, like the Benedictines and things like that. But we're going to see it really start to develop at this time period. Okay, so especially with the icons of Mary and the celebration of the Dormition or the Assumption, the Immaculate Conception, generally celebrated and practiced. Now, also something that's very important under Alcuin is, up to this point, Scripture is written in minuscule or majuscule. In other words, no punctuation, no separation of words. You had to really know the language to be able to read it. Okay, so now it's not Alcuin himself, it's one of his subordinates that actually invents it, but he promulgates it, if you would. But this Carolingian script is going to separate the words out, put punctuation in, so it's easier for people to read. Okay. We're also going to see Charlemagne wanted his own language, which later will become the German language, to be promoted, and so we see the beginnings of vernacular. And by the way, Venerable Bede is also doing something similar with Anglo-Saxon, which will eventually become English. Okay, so a lot of the modern languages starting to develop at this time period, again, under the aegis of monks from England. So yes, English have some merit as well, not just the Irish. Okay, meanwhile, let's go back to Ireland. We have the second wave of barbarians, okay? So after the Carolingian Renaissance, this next wave of barbarians is going to kind of wipe out culture again. But again, how is it going to be preserved? Is the monks. Okay, so found some, so what the monks did is, now they didn't defend themselves in the sense that they weren't fighting and shooting, but to be able to preserve some of the things is they built these big stone towers that, if you'll notice, the entryway is about 10 feet up on the side there. They would have the wooden ladder, you climb up in there, and when the barbarians came, you pulled it up, sealed the door, and they climbed higher. And you'll notice that the windows are much higher, so they are outside of arrow shot. Okay, so that's how they preserved some of their, preserved their life and some of the treasures that they had. Okay, so as we can see, we've got the Vikings coming from Scandinavia. They will go all over the place, including Iceland, Greenland, even Newfoundland. And then you'll also see them crossing through Europe and getting even as far as Russia. And in fact, one of these Viking chieftains named Rus gives his name to Russia. Okay. You also have the Magyars following the same path as the Huns coming in. They're going to mostly settle in Hungary, Bohemia area, but they will also raid in other places. And then, of course, we have the whole phenomenon of Islam starting to come in from the east and the south. And that's a whole other story in itself, right? Okay. But I'll try to talk about that a little bit more next class in the context of the mendicants and the beginnings of the Crusades and things like that. Okay, so we'll look at that. But for right now, since I still have a little time, I'm going to keep moving with the Benedictines. Okay, so we're going to follow the Benedictines through the rest of the Middle Ages, and if I'm lucky, we'll actually end with Bernard. We'll see. If not, we'll get it next time. Okay, so now this is also the time period as the wave of barbarian upon barbarian come through. Some of these areas, like for example in France, they actually bribe the Normans, right? The Northmen. And they say, here, I will donate all this land to you if you stop fighting us. And so the Normans or the Northmen settle in Normandy and proceed to become more French than the French, okay? So, and they will then cross, the Battle of Hastings with William the Conqueror and start to take over England and things like that. So the Vikings settle down eventually, and they and the Magyars are finally converted. The Muslims are contained, and gradually, although it will take 700 years, will gradually be pushed out of Spain. But that will be a Renaissance story that somebody else will tell. Okay, but we have the beginning of the systems of feudalism. And basically what is going on there is you have a chieftain who gives land grants to his officers or barons. So he's if you were the king, giving his barons land grants, and those barons giving land grants to lower, like knights, etc. So there's this graded land tenure, which also is associated with military service to the head. Now, what's going to happen here then is, now these converted chieftains who are becoming the barons and counts of Europe at this point, they're pious. They want to give land to the church. They want to give an income to the diocese for, the helping of the poor and, prayers and masses being said for them and their families. And so we'll start to see land grants being given to bishops and monasteries and things like that. Unfortunately, these gifts have strings attached, which would include, I get to come and decide who's the next abbot, since this is my land and I want to control who's in charge of my land. And pretty soon, if you've got monasteries that you have huge amounts of land and huge amounts of income, you definitely want a friend there, and you just might want to put a family member there so that income is also going to you. And that's, of course, going to lead to unworthy leadership, right? Lay investitures taking place. And also, these kings that are giving land grants are expecting some service back from the monks. Not to mention the disruption of the monastery's life when the king and his family want to come and say hunt on the lands or eat and pray with the monks and things like that. It's going to lead to worldliness and corruption. Not to mention the practice of your first son is going to be your successor, the second son is going to be your spare, and your third son or your third daughter who can't get married, whether they have a vocation or not, they're going into the cloister. Okay? Or if I have an advantageous marriage, and even though she's in the convent, we're going to pull her out and marry her because that's what the family needs. Okay? So you're going to see people who have real vocations getting pulled out, people that don't have vocations being put in. And so it's going to lead to a lot of corruption. And so with that, we have the reform of Cluny. Did you have a question over here? Or, okay, I thought I saw your hand up. Okay. So the Cluniac reform is actually going to start because of a noble. Okay, and that's William the Pious of Aquitaine. Okay, so in the midst of his feudalism and lay investiture and corruption, we're going to see Cluny be founded. Okay, so here we go. St. Peter's Monastery is going to be the mother house of the Cluniac reform. Okay, it is founded by William I, Duke of Aquitaine in 910. He's also known as William the Pious, and he will donate his hunting grounds in Burgundy to the monastery. He'll build the monastery, donate the lands, and it will include all kinds of land. Okay, so they've got forest, they've got farmland, they've got mills that they can set up with water or rivers and things. Okay. Now, what he does is something that no other noble has done up to this point, and that is he donates the land without any strings attached. He basically says the only obligation you have to me and my family is to pray for us. Okay. And he sends to the Pope, and he says, I would like to nominate Berno. If you notice, he doesn't just put Berno in place. He goes to the Pope and says, I would like to nominate him. Would you please approve his nomination? And the Pope approves. So this would be, I believe this is, here, I'll find out who he is. Hold on. That would be, can you, Sergius III. Okay. So Sergius III is the Pope at the time, and they set up the charter for this new reform of the Benedictine order, which will include that you cannot accept lands if they have the feudal service attached to them. Okay? That the Pope is the ultimate authority and no baron or king can appoint the abbots. However, with the stipulation that the monks can have veto power, as in they get to help choose the abbot and the Pope would approve it. And if the Pope is going to give any of their lands away, that the monks would also have the right to say yes or no. Okay, so virtually what this does is make Cluny independent of lay investiture, right? They now have the freedom, if you would, to be monks. Now, what we'll also see is that the great emphasis of Cluny is going to be prayer and education. Okay, so the great educators of this. And they're actually, it comes to the point where since the liturgy and teaching are their main thrust, they aren't really self-sustaining. They're going to need help, donations and help to keep the monastery going. Now, the other thing that's different about the Cluniac reform is that it's a centralized government. The way Benedict set it up is each abbot is, or each abbey is separate from every other abbey. Okay, so any association would be that of advice and spiritual support, but and also the Benedictine rule is extremely adaptable. So, I mean, some really clear-cut, firm principles, but you can adapt it to whatever culture you're in. So, if it's up in Germany, the monastery, there'll be beer instead of wine. They're going to maybe have more periods for rest because they're in a colder climate. And obviously, the farmlands aren't going to be farmed at the same rate as they are in the south, where it's more moderate temperature, etc. Okay, so Benedict's rule is very, very clear, but it's also very adaptable. what's going to happen here at Cluny, which is kind of a taking off in a different direction than the general Benedictine monastery, is this centralized government. The abbot of Cluny is in charge of all the other monasteries that have the Cluniac reform, and they will actually be called priors instead of abbots. Now this is helpful again because it's Cluny that's getting good leadership in all these different monasteries that are now spreading throughout Europe. Okay, so it's helping to settle it. And also it's the Cluniac reform that is going to help, well, to bring back civilization. Okay, so the chaos and the constant war that's happening is going to be curtailed by this. And what are some of Cluny's influences? And I might have to stop here soon. When is Mass at 11:30?
11:30. Yep.
Okay. Father John took a long time. But, oh well, offer me up, I guess. Okay, so they're going to cooperate. Now, at this time, Europe is like bloody war. Even if we now have feudalism in place, these barons are constantly fighting each other. There's still constant raids and destruction taking place. So that we have Pope Leo IX, who's, by the way, this is the same pope that the Eastern Schism is going to take place around this time too, where the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church are going to mutually excommunicate each other. Okay, so this is the same pope. But what is he doing in Europe is he is trying to get these barons to quit fighting each other. It's like, so the truce of God is, okay, you can't fight on Sundays, you can't fight during the Easter season or the Christmas season. All right, so he's at least saying we're going to have times of peace at least certain times of the year. You can't fight all the time. So the Cluniacs in all their different monasteries are going to help convince all these different barons to obey what the Pope has asked them to do. So the truce of God, and then later on the peace of God, limiting warfare and the destruction of warfare. We'll also see another influence of Cluny will be 4 great reforming popes are going to come from this monastery as well, including Hildebrand or Gregory VII, okay, who is, and in fact the Pope right before him is going to start the conclave that only cardinals can elect popes, not barons and kings. In other words, the lay authorities can't interfere with ecclesiastical affairs. Okay, so that's going to be Gregory VII. We'll see Urban II is the one who starts the Crusades. He'll be the one who preaches the Crusades. But also with Humbert and others, he will be starting the reform of like removing Simonical bishops, lay investiture bishops that are corrupt, and putting in good men. So we see the reform of the church. Cluny is really helping to reform the church, and also we are going to see, from the time of Cluny on, we're going to see Europe emerge from the Dark Ages and really get into the height of the Middle Ages. Okay, so we also see the conclave is actually kept at Cluny, and with the election of Calixtus II. Okay, and then there's also, well, I don't have time to go through it, but there's a lot more they do, but you get the idea. Okay, now here is, this would be, by the way, Cluny was destroyed during the French Revolution. But this is this magnificent, wealthy monastery, the mother house of the Benedictine order in Europe. Okay, and there's Cluny 1, 2, and 3. The original Cluny that William Pius founded was obviously pretty modest. But by the time we get to the height of Cluny's influence, you see this huge church over here to the right. The only thing that's left now is this little section of the south transept of the main church. So it's huge. Okay, so here, the next thing, here's some remnants of Cluny, as in my next thing. Okay, so Odo of Cluny, the first 7 abbots of Cluny are canonized saints. So St. Louis, Berno, Odo, and some of the others. Okay, so some examples of, this is Romanesque architecture, okay? So the wedding of Roman and, if you would, the going back to Byzantine during the time of Charlemagne, okay? So we can see, so this Cluny Tower here of the Holy Water, this is the only surviving part of the structure. Everything else was destroyed in the French Revolution. Although archaeologists have gone back and if you actually go to Cluny, you can see the extent of the monastery. It's huge, a monastery. And this church is just amazing. But these would be an example of Romanesque capital that would be in the choir. And this is the theme of plain chant. So they actually had the different symbolic representations of the Liturgy of the Hours. Yes?
Exactly, where is Cluny?
Central France. I think it would be closer to Lyon. Lyon, that, or kind of Dijon, Lyon area. But, okay. And then you can see this is a surviving wine cellar. You can see the Gothic arches, or the beginning of the Gothic style there. Okay. And it seems to me that I should probably let you go at this point. So we'll do this I'll do the Cistercian reform of